I used to watch a lot of Jenna Moreci, and I mean properly watch, not just the odd video here and there. I mean, I was locked in for a while. Her content is very direct, very confident, very this is what works, and this is what doesn't. Some of it is basic, yes, but sometimes you need to hear that advice as well. And when I was trying to figure out writing, especially early on, this was the kind of voice I really appreciated. And I mean that. And I still think some of her advice is brilliant. It felt like someone cutting through all the noise and just telling you what to do. And to be fair to her, like I said, a lot of the advice is really solid. Stuff about pacing, tension, character motivations, cutting filler, making sure scenes have purpose. None of it is wrong. And a lot of it is the kind of advice you learn the hard way if no one tells you. Welcome to this episode. My name is David James, and welcome. Remember to like, subscribe, and if you hit that hype button, that would be recommended. Also, if you want exclusive content, early access, and ad-free versions of my videos, please check out my Substack, Patreon, or consider becoming a YouTube channel member. So, I had this build-up idea in my head of what her books would be like. Not perfect, obviously, but sharp, intentional, and tight. And with the discourse around the Saviour's army and a few other books, I decided to read them. I decided to sit down. And I remember finishing it, and I was just sitting there like, oh. I wasn't even disappointed, just confused, because it really didn't match the voice I've been listening to. This book is far from unreadable. I want to be really clear about that. It's not a disaster. It's not something where you're laughing at it or questioning how it got published. It's just very, very, very familiar. You've seen the characters before. You've seen the dynamics. You can kind of feel the things where they're going before they get there. And again, that's not automatically a problem. But I was curious to see how the book would line up to her advice. Familiar stories can definitely work really well if they're executed with enough tension or personality or emotional weight. But here is where everything just felt flat. Scenes happened, but they didn't build up to anything. There was no real sense of escalation, no moment where you felt like, okay, we're getting somewhere now. Now that it feeling like you were going nowhere, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It was really strange. It was the kind of... it just kind of moved from one thing to another. And I think that's what stuck with me the most, the lack of tension. Because if you've watched her videos, she talks a lot about stakes, about making the readers care, about making sure something is always at risk, even in quiet moments. But the book, that feeling just isn't there. And it creates this really weird disconnect with what you're reading versus what you're thinking you should know about it. And I've heard it explained better by most people than me, let's be honest. But why isn't it here? And then you start kind of noticing things, other little things. The phrasing can be awkward in places, no consistency, not to the point where it ruins the experience, but it's enough that you clock it. Little lines that feel slightly off, slightly clunky, slightly first draft, or slightly to fill up word count. And then there are the cliches. Again, not overwhelming, but present enough that you notice them, especially if you're listening to someone talk about avoiding them. And I just keep coming back to the same fault. This doesn't line up. So naturally, in my researching, I went to the Saviour's sister, thinking maybe it was just a one-off, maybe things tighten up, maybe this is where it clicks, maybe I see more of her advice in this book. But it was the same situation, same general issues with tension, the same sense that things are happening without really building, same moments where the writing feels like it needed another push. You start seeing patterns at this point, and once you see them, you can't unsee these patterns. It's not that there's nothing good here. I think the idea of both books works really well. Conceptually, they work well. The concept works, but it's never quite pushed far enough. It lacks the the sharpness that she has in her videos and the way that she talks. It never fully commits. And then there's this How to Write Romantasy book, which is a different kind of thing because it's closer to what she does on YouTube. It's advice, it's structure, it's more controlled. And I will never write a romantasy novel, but I decided to read it in researching this. And I actually think that's the strongest of what I read, because it plays into her strengths. It's clean, it's organised, it knows what it is. But then you get the sense of the same feeling. Like you've been watching for a while, you've heard this all before. It's all advice she's given in other videos. It's not bad, it just feels like a remixing of existing ideas rather than something new. It's just old ideas reframed around writing a romantasy book. And this is where the whole conversation can get a bit awkward, because I don't think the conclusion is what people expect. I don't think she's a bad writer. I think she's an ordinary writer. And I don't mean that as an insult. I think most writers are, including myself probably. Most books sit somewhere in the middle. Not incredible, not terrible, just fine. The difference here is the position she's in. When you're giving writing advice on the level to a large audience with that kind of confidence, people are going to hold the work up next to it. That's just how it works, even if it's unfair. It's just natural. You're saying this is how you do it, so people look at your work and go, okay, show me. And when the work comes across as average, it creates this weird tension where the advice feels stronger than the execution. It's like someone explaining fitness perfectly. They know the science, they know the routines, they know the diet, and then you see them apply it and the results are kind of alright. You're not questioning their knowledge, you're questioning the gap between knowledge and application. And the gap is real. It exists for a lot of people though. And I'll say this myself included. Understanding writing and doing writing are two completely different skills. You can break down a story, analyse it, explain why it works, and still struggle to create something that hits the same marks consistently. Because when you're in it, when you're actually writing, there are a hundred other things getting in the way. Doubt, time, pacing issues, losing sight of structure halfway through, characters not quite doing what you want them to do. It's messy. And I think that's what this really comes down to. Not this person is bad, not this person is at fault, just this is someone who understands theory very well. And you know what? I would recommend her channel for advice if you're just starting out. But the execution doesn't always match the theory. And that's far more common than people like to admit. There's also this other layer to it, which is the platform. If your books come out without, if the books came out without YouTube channel attached, I genuinely don't think that'd be part of any conversation. They'd probably sit in that huge space of indie books that are decent, readable, but not particularly memorable. And again, that's not an insult, that is a lot of books, both indie and traditional. So when people criticizing it, writing it, when people criticize it, or when and the criticism gets written off as just YouTubers or people being negative, it doesn't really work because that's the space she came from. You can never fully separate those things. If your identity as a creator is tied to giving advice, then the work becomes part of the conversation whether you want it to or not. Because people aren't just reading the books in isolations, they're reading them in the context of everything she's said about writing. And when those things don't quite match, it stands out. There has been a lot of talk about how she responds to criticism, but I'm not really interested in getting into that too much. Online stuff can get messy too quickly, and it usually turns into a pylon or a defense squad, and neither of those things are particularly useful. The more interesting part, at least to me, is the work itself, because that isn't really about one person, it's about that gap between knowledge and doing. And if I'm being honest, I see a bit of myself in this as well. There are things I know about writing, things I've talked about, things that I've probably sounded very confident talking about. And then I go back and look at my own work and think, yeah, I didn't quite do that, did I? It's easier to explain something when you're not the one wrestling with it on the page. It's a lot harder to actually get it right. And I think that's why this whole thing feels less like a critique and more like a reality check for everyone. Because it's very easy to sit in that advice space and speak with authority. It's harder to back it up with consistency in your own work. And most of us are somewhere in that gap trying to close it. Some people just have a bigger spotlight on them when they're doing it. And that's kind of where I've landed on this. And I say this, it's just an average book. That's all it is, average. That's the only way I can put it. It's not terrible, but it's not brilliant either. It's one of those things you buy on your Kindle sale when you're traveling and probably don't even remember reading it. And I also think, giving good advice doesn't automatically translate into great execution. And being aware that most writers sit in that middle ground, and I'm aware that if people are going to put themselves in a position where they're teaching something, and I believe we need to be aware of this, people are going to look at your work a little more closely. Not to tear you down, just to see if it lines up, and sometimes it doesn't. That's the disconnect. You have someone who gives advice, good advice, but doesn't follow their own advice. And that's true of so many people. And that's been real. I think the discourse is a bit overblown, but I think when you've positioned yourself as a YouTuber who makes that type of content, and then what you put out doesn't line up, doesn't match what you created or what you say, that's why people are questioning it. That's why there's criticism. So, see you in the next one.